Hello everybody and welcome to another session of Bigfoot Tales. I'm your host D.L.Soucy of Remember Me Media, and it's my pleasure to bring you these stories from time gone past of what used to be known as the hairy men of the woods, and today we call them Bigfoot or Sasquatch or many other names. There's dozens of them across the country, but we have a couple of different aspects here that we have to address as we do our research into this phenomenon or anomaly, whatever you want to call it. And just as a little bit of background before we get into the actual story for my new subscribers and listeners, and I thank all of you for subscribing and listening and being civil in your comments. I'm kind of a folklore / historian, and I've chosen Bigfoot research as a means of delving into the past because I find that ultimately some of the most fascinating stories out there, as far as our history goes. It's a very ignored part of our history. These wild men of the woods, and I think if we had paid more attention to them as the years went by, I don't think we'd have this issue of what is Bigfoot and whether or not he exists today, for many reasons. But two, we do have a problem that is connected to the Bigfoot research and the wild men of the woods stories, in that many of the wild men of the stories are just men and women who really want nothing to do with society. Some of them were mentally challenged, as we call them today, but there's many reasons why human beings can be woods dwellers, hermits. We have here in Maine the recent story of the North Pond hermit, which has gained international attention, and so we have to look at stuff like that. However, as we go back through our stories of the past, the further and further back we get, the more and more strange these stories become. And one of the aspects that I'm looking at is it possible that, yes, indeed, Bigfoot is entirely human, even though they're not quite like us, our modern-day home dwellers? And is it possible that as time went by, that from time to time, some of these Bigfoot, the smaller ones, smaller in height and all that, is it possible that they tried to get closer to society, to blend in and eventually join in that society? That's a question that I've been looking at quite in depth, and I found quite a few different stories. And one of them comes out of the Tryon News from Tryon, North Carolina. It's actually bylined from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which is where I get the title of this little video from. Ape-man's reign of terror ends. Maniac captured after he had terrorized whole country for more than 2 weeks. And again, it's bylined in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It doesn't give an exact date, but since this story was published in the newspaper on October 8th of 1920, it obviously would have been before that time. And this takes place in Baldwin Township, near the town of Hayes. One of the aspects you have to look at here is, was this human being with a mental problem, or was this possibly a Bigfoot trying to be domesticated? And some of the aspects of this description lead me to believe that, in fact, there may be something here. As I'm looking at the artist rendering of this creature, it was captured. It's shown with a very hairy body. There's a lot of hair drawn around it. He has a club, a lot of hair. But as I put this picture up, you want to pay attention to the broadness of his nose, the way his mouth looks, big round eyes, and the ears, smallish ears that are sticking out from the side. And on the top of his head, he has a tuft of hair that's kind of, I don't Don't really know whether it's tied up that way or if it just naturally grows that way. But if you remember some of the other stories that I read from C.A. Stevens, this fits the description of the hairy man, or the Wendigo, the Pamula, the Engine Devil, whatever you want to call it in those stories. But let's get into the story, then we'll discuss it a little bit more in depth afterwards. And again, this is called the Ape-man's Reign of Terror Ends. The ape-man, who had terrorized the countryside between Greensburg and Homestead for 2 weeks, was captured in a heavily wooded thicket in Baldwin Township and lodged in the Hayes police station. His body, nearly nude, a fearsome, grimy sight, and the matted hair on his face and head 6 inches long, the ape-man so closely resembled his simian ancestors that the officers who came on him unawares were in doubt for several minutes whether he was man or beast. When captured, the ape-man was sleeping beside a fire. On being awakened, he sprang at Constable Reisenbarth and attempted to sink his fangs in the officer's throat. He was subdued after a struggle lasting several minutes. Apparently unable or unwilling to speak, the ape-man, who in actions and looks is the primordial male, sits mooning in his cell in the Hayes police station, occasionally uttering deep guttural sounds resembling a croaking of a huge frog. The first appearance which the giant monkey made was in Homestead in Mifflin Townships, where he suddenly invaded the blackberry patches in the neighborhood, which daily attract large numbers of women and children. The ape's taste for fruit suddenly caused a hurried exodus from the patches, which are now quite deserted. Indignant citizens formed themselves into bands and decided to hunt down Mr. Monk without delay. They got down their shotguns and rifles and started a monkey hunt through the surrounding marshes and thickets. One farmer complained that some unknown individual had milked 8 of his best cows and declared that he found tracks of a peculiar shape in the fields where his cows had been grazing. Subsequently found that 2 sheep, apparently strangled to death, and 2 hounds used to trail the ape had been killed, and the Mifflin Township authorities realized they were dealing with a dangerous beast. The posses had received word that the carcass of a sheep had been found at the entry to an abandoned mine pit, and the theory was advanced that the guerrilla was using the mine for his headquarters. A guard of West Homestead individuals, armed with shotguns, took up a position at all the entrances to the pit and announced that it was going to drive the simian malefactor out by use of sulfur candles. The decision to adopt this plan was reached after a squad led by Constable Walter Griggs had returned from an excursion into the main entry of the pit and reported that a careful examination of the ground, moistened by recent rains, disclosed many footprints, which Constable Griggs declared were those of an ape of no small dimensions. That's the end of the article. It's just a short piece, but still full of interesting information here. Again, as we look at the image of the man here, you have to wonder if this is exactly what he looked like, and if it's exactly what he looked like, you notice that in many aspects he sort of resembles today's human being. From the top of his head, where you have the tuft of hair up there. His facial features, his arms look rather large, broad shoulders. His hands are big, and he has what looks to be rather large feet. Again, this is an artist rendering, but why did the artist draw him this way? Is that because he actually saw him, and he was drawing what he really saw, or did this come out of his imagination? Number one point here, beyond the picture, is that when captured, the ape-man was sleeping beside a fire. People say that Bigfoot doesn't use fire, but I have heard reports and stories coming out where they have on occasion been known to visit fires and actually build and sit by fires when they're not being observed. And there's no chance of anybody coming upon them. Second point, on being awakened, he attempted to sink his fangs in Officer Reisenbarth's throat. Human beings don't have fangs. If he was a human, why did they use the term fangs? And why did this animal or person, whatever he was, try to bite the neck of this officer? That's something that a wild animal does. Bears will do it, dogs will do it, wolves, and we have various stories from the past where this has actually been the case. For instance, in Teddy Roosevelt's famous story of Bauman's Bigfoot tale, which I've related on another video here, supposedly had that aspect of the story. Point number 3, apparently unable or unwilling to speak, according to the article. He sat in his cell mooning and occasionally uttering deep guttural sounds resembling the croaking of a huge frog, or grunting sound is what it would sound like. And we have a lot of different Bigfoot stories where that sound has been heard in relation to their presence. They call him a giant monkey, is point number 4, which tells me that they definitely thought that he was kind of simian in character, and that he was giant, which means that he was bigger than the average man. Eats fruit, just like most wild animals would do. Further down, one farmer complained that some unknown individual had milked 8 of his best cows, and we have had stories where Bigfoot has been seen or known to have milked cows, and this farmer declared that he found tracks of a peculiar shape. Also, along with that, towards the end of the story, Constable Griggs declares that the footprints that they found in the wet ground around the pit were those of an ape of no small dimensions, which means that they were really, really big feet. So again, this is just a fairly short article, and there's a lot of aspects here that we have to look at before we determine exactly what it is we're talking about. Was this just a strange human being, or what was this thing? Was it human? Was it Bigfoot? Obviously, we're never going to know for sure. But again, this is the article. Take it for what it's worth. Again, this was almost 100 years ago when this was published. Now, and not exactly sure when it occurred because the byline is not dated. So you'll have to figure it out from there. But it was published on October 8th of 1920, so it was prior to that time. And I guess I'll leave you with that for today to mull over. And again, think about the idea that is it possible that if Bigfoot was a human, that certain members of their tribes, is it possible that they have in the past, through the years, tried to assimilate themselves into regular human society? That's again it for today. Again, thanks for watching, thanks for sharing, and don't forget to comment, rate, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time on Bigfoot Tales.